This is the TV Live podcast with Rob Francis.
Independent television emerged in a Britain still knitting itself back together after the upheaval of war. The mid-1950s were years of modest hope, quiet resilience, and a national desire for fresh colour. Many homes still knew rationing. Streets still carried the worn texture of austerity. Yet an undercurrent of restlessness ran through daily life. People wanted novelty. They wanted choice. They wanted more than one voice speaking to them from the glowing box in the corner. For many years, the BBC had been that lone voice. It spoke with authority and restraint. It championed public service broadcasting and believed, quite sincerely, that television existed to uplift and educate. And while that mission was honourable, it also leaned towards a certain paternal firmness. When you hold a monopoly for long enough, you forget to look over your shoulder. It becomes easy to assume your way is the natural order of things. Pressure grew for a challenger. Some came from the public who wanted livelier programmes. Some came from politicians who disliked monopolies on principle. And a notable share came from newspaper proprietors who saw television as the next great communications frontier and had no desire to let the BBC hold it forever. These motives varied in nobility, but together they pointed in one direction. Britain needed a second channel. The Television Act of 1953 made this shift possible. The government insisted that advertising would be allowed, but regulated in a distinctly British fashion. They were determined to avoid the neon blitz of American commercial broadcasting. And so the Independent Television Authority, the ITA, was formed to ensure that commercial television would be energetic, but not reckless, daring, but not gaudy. Britain wanted a modern system, but one that reflected its own temperament. The ITA carved the nation into regions and awarded franchises to companies that submitted proposals. This is where independent television took on its unique character. Unlike the BBC, ITV was never intended as one monolithic organisation. It would be a federation of regional broadcasters, each with its own management, finances, creative instincts, and sense of place. This arrangement seems almost eccentric by today's standards, but it is exactly what gave ITV its distinct identity. Associated Rediffusion won London weekdays. ATV took London weekends and the Midlands. Granada claimed the North with a fierce sense of purpose. And ABC took the weekend slots in the Midlands and the North. These companies were a curious blend of cinema groups, press interests and entrepreneurs with varying degrees of nerve. Many had never run television stations before, which was obvious from the start. They had to build studios from raw materials. They had to hire staff who had never worked in commercial broadcasting, because, frankly, commercial broadcasting had never existed in Britain. They needed transmitters, schedules, announcers, scripts, lights, sound equipment, everything from the ground up. One often hears romantic talk about pioneers, and in this case the romance is deserved. These companies were inventing a new broadcasting culture in real time. On the 22nd of September 1955, independent television switched on for the first time. The opening night has become the stuff of legend, but legends survive because they hold a kernel of truth. When the first advert played, a modest toothpaste promotion, it was as if Britain had been invited into a slightly different version of itself. Not brighter, not louder, but more varied. For the first time, television acknowledged that it was also a marketplace of ideas, creativity, and commerce. Technical glitches made their presence known. Some viewers had unstable pictures. Others were disoriented by the novelty of commercial breaks. Newspapers ran columns filled with both delight and outrage. It's clear from those early reviews that Britain hadn't yet decided what it thought of ITV. Some embraced it as modern and energetic. Others feared creeping Americanization, convinced the country had opened a door that would be difficult to close. I tend to think that these anxieties say more about Britain's ambivalent relationship with change than they do about television itself. What matters is that viewers kept watching. ITV offered something the BBC, for all its virtues, struggled to match, a sense of possibility. Programmes like Sunday Night at the London Palladium brought glamour into homes that rarely saw it. Variety shows embraced spectacle. Quiz shows injected speed into a medium sometimes accused of moving at the pace of drying paint. The tone was lighter, looser, less anxious about intellectual respectability. Yet, this popular image tells only half the story. ITV also began developing serious journalism. This Week, launched in 1956, tackled current affairs with ambition and rigour. It proved that commercial broadcasters could handle weighty subjects without sacrificing quality. In fact, the programme became one of the most respected in the country. This dual identity, show business on one side, social inquiry on the other, defined the network and allowed it to avoid becoming a one-note operation. The regional nature of ITV played a decisive role. Granada's Manchester base became a symbol of northern pride. Sidney Bernstein, ever the perfectionist, believed the company's work should challenge London's cultural dominance. Granada produced programmes that sounded and felt northern, unapologetically so. ATV, led by the charismatic and utterly theatrical Lou Grade, revelled in a brand of showmanship rooted in music hall traditions. And Associated Rediffusion projected a sense of London professionalism, polished, crisp and orderly. But these differences were not weaknesses. They were ITV's secret strength. Instead of a single perspective, the national schedule became a tapestry. Viewers heard accents that matched their own. They saw studio design that reflected local character. And when a network allows regions to express themselves, viewers feel included, rather than addressed from afar. Of course, money always lurked in the background. If viewers drifted away, so did advertising revenue. And if revenue collapsed, so did the companies. This pressure forced innovation. ITV could not afford complacency. And I think this dynamic, uncomfortable though it must have been for executives, was one of the main reasons the network took creative risks. Playing it safe was far more dangerous than trying something new. Financial strain also produced some interesting internal contrasts. Associated Rediffusion spent with a zeal that bordered on recklessness, determined to create a first-rate service. Granada ran lean. Every pound had to justify itself. This tension between lavish aspiration and careful pragmatism ran through the network's early years. In some ways, it mirrored the country's broader balancing act between post-war frugality and a growing appetite for modern life. But by the late 1950s, ITV had not only stabilised, it had become indispensable. The BBC responded with fresh formats, brighter presentation, and a willingness to adopt some of ITV's livelier techniques. And competition improved both networks. Britain moved from a broadcasting monoculture to a duet, with two distinct philosophies shaping national discussion. This shift had profound consequences for public life. Television became less about instruction and more about dialogue. ITV also changed household behaviour. The commercial break became a communal reflex. Families moved in synchrony. Kettle on, quick dash to the bathroom, back to the sofa at the exact moment the announcer reappeared. This may sound trivial, but shared rituals give shape to social memory. Even now, older viewers can recall entire decades of life, measured out in 3-minute intervals between commercials. Cultural critics at the time worried that advertising would turn the British public into passive consumers, and I tend to think those anxieties underestimated the audience. People understood that adverts were selling something. They took from them what they wanted and ignored the rest. Far from corroding public taste, advertising helped fund drama, journalism, children's programming, and regional studios. It made possible a pluralistic broadcasting culture that many viewers had long hoped for. Another lasting legacy of ITV's early years lies in its treatment of regional identity. For the first time, television did not present Britain as a single, tidy national story, but as a varied landscape of voices and perspectives. A viewer in Liverpool could see something that felt rooted in their own experience. A viewer in Birmingham might encounter a presenter who spoke like someone they might meet at the bus stop. That sense of representation, subtle but profound, helped knit together a nation that often struggled with its own internal differences. By the end of the decade, ITV felt far less like an experiment and far more like an institution. The early storms had passed, ad revenue stabilised, studios expanded, talent moved between companies with growing confidence, and viewers began to recognise the ITV personality. Not one face, but many, each region adding its own flavour. And this mosaic of approaches created a broadcasting environment that was richer, broader, and more democratic than many had predicted. In my view, this is ITV's great achievement of the 1950s. It opened a window. Through that window came new ideas, new energies, new styles of performance and journalism. It loosened British broadcasting from its more rigid tendencies and allowed it to breathe. It offered the public not only entertainment, but also a sense of agency. Viewers could choose. That freedom, modest though it seems now, marked a cultural shift. And as we look back, it is easy to think that ITV's success was inevitable. It was not. It relied on visionaries, risk-takers, engineers, creatives, and an audience willing to embrace something unfamiliar. It required regulators who understood when to guide and when to step aside. It needed a delicate balance between commercial imperative and public responsibility. Many countries tried commercial broadcasting in this era and ended up with systems that either collapsed into excess or calcified under control. Britain managed something unusual, a commercial network that preserved national character while encouraging regional diversity. The ITV of the 1950s was bold, imperfect, unpredictable, but fundamentally hopeful. It told Britain that television could be both serious and joyous, grounded and glamorous. It helped transform the living room into a small theatre of national life, one informed not by a single viewpoint, but by the interplay of many. The story of independent television, though, does not end here. In the next chapter of this look back, the 1960s arrive, and ITV grows more confident, more ambitious, and more willing to redefine what British television could be. It is a decade of new talent, sharper competition, and a cultural awakening that will leave its mark on everything that follows. Thank you for listening to this episode of the TV Live podcast. I'm Rob Francis.
This has been the TV Live podcast with Rob Francis, a Red Telephone Box production.